The sky burned crimson as the alien warship disappeared into the atmosphere, leaving nothing but silence and smoke in its wake. In the crater of scorched earth below, a small figure stirred, forgotten, abandoned, left for dead. She wasn't supposed to survive, wasn't meant to be anything more than collateral damage in a war that had raged across stars. Her skin shimmered with an iridescent blue hue as she tried to move, each breath a struggle against the weight of betrayal and the physical pain shooting through her slender frame. The battlefield around her lay silent now, the thundering of weapons and screaming of the wounded replaced by an eerie stillness that felt almost as threatening. Through eyes that reflected the light differently than human eyes would, she surveyed the devastation. Bodies of both species lay scattered across the once verdant field, a grim testament to the cost of this interstellar conflict. Her own people had left her behind. Damaged goods, no longer useful to their campaign. She didn't have a name, not one that human tongues could pronounce anyway. The closest translation might be Starlight, though even that failed to capture the nuance of her people's language. She was barely what humans would consider a teenager, though her species aged differently, young enough to be scared, old enough to understand exactly what had happened to her. In the distance, the sound of movement caught her attention. Humans, their military units sweeping the battlefield, looking for survivors or threats. Starlight tried to crawl behind the remains of a shattered transport vehicle, her wounded leg dragging uselessly behind her. The movement sent waves of agony through her body, and she bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. The metallic taste of her blood, darker and thicker than human blood, filled her mouth. "I think I saw something move over there," a deep voice called out, followed by the sound of heavy boots approaching her hiding spot. Starlight pressed herself against the twisted metal, wishing she could make herself invisible. Her species couldn't do that, contrary to some human myths about aliens, but right now she wished those stories had been true. The human appeared suddenly, rounding the corner of the wrecked vehicle with his weapon raised. He wore the standard-issue battle armor of the Earth Defense Force, his face partially obscured by a tactical helmet. For a moment, they just stared at each other, predator and prey frozen in a tableau of war's aftermath. "I found one," he called over his shoulder, his weapon still trained on her. "Juvenile female, injured." Starlight understood his language. All warriors of her kind were implanted with translation modules before being sent to battle. She also understood what happened to captured enemies. She'd seen it firsthand. Death might be preferable. "Please," she managed to say, the word awkward on her tongue but recognizable. "I am abandoned." The human's eyes narrowed behind his visor, suspicion evident in his stance. "Abandoned? By whom?" "My people," she replied, gesturing weakly toward the sky. "Defective unit. Not worth retrieval." Something flickered across the human's face then, an emotion Starlight couldn't quite identify. He lowered his weapon slightly, and for the first time, she noticed details about him. The weathered lines around his eyes suggested he'd seen too much combat. The small tear in his uniform indicated he hadn't had time for proper repairs, and the way he held himself spoke of recent injuries poorly healed. "Lieutenant Walker," a voice crackled through his communications device. "Orders are to neutralize any remaining hostiles. Confirm status." The human, Lieutenant Walker, didn't respond immediately. Instead, he crouched down, just out of her reach, studying her with an intensity that made Starlight want to shrink away. "Your people left you here to die?" he asked quietly. Starlight nodded, not trusting her voice. The pain was getting worse, and the edges of her vision were starting to blur. She didn't have much time left without medical intervention. "Lieutenant Walker," the voice came again, more insistent this time. "Confirm status and proceed with protocol." Walker reached up and switched off his communications device, a decision that clearly violated protocol. Then, to Starlight's shock, he set his weapon down and reached into a compartment on his armor, pulling out what appeared to be a medical kit. "I'm a medic," he explained, his voice gentler now. Let me look at that leg. Starlight recoiled instinctively. Why? Help enemy. Walker's hands paused, hovering above her wounded leg. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something she hadn't expected: compassion, tinged with a deep weariness. Because I'm tired of watching children die in old men's wars, he said simply. Human or alien, doesn't matter anymore. As he began to treat her wound with surprising gentleness, Starlight felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just confusion. She'd been trained to see humans as brutal savages, unworthy of the stars they now traveled among. Yet here was one, risking his own safety to help an enemy combatant. In the distance, explosions began again, suggesting the battle wasn't as over as it had seemed. Walker's head snapped up, his expression darkening as he calculated their options. Can you move if I help you? He asked urgently. Before Starlight could answer, the ground shook with a much closer explosion. Debris rained down around them as Walker threw himself over her, shielding her smaller body with his own. As the dust settled, she could hear shouting. Human voices, getting closer. Walker looked down at her, determination hardening his features. I'm getting you out of here, he said, making a decision that would change both their lives forever. But you have to trust me. The real question was, could she? Everything she'd been taught said no. Everything she'd just witnessed suggested maybe, just maybe, there was another way. As Walker carefully lifted her, mindful of her injuries, Starlight made the most important decision of her young life. And that's when the real story began. Pain shot through Starlight's body as Walker lifted her. She bit back a cry, determined not to draw attention to their position. The human's arms were surprisingly gentle despite his military build, cradling her damaged form with unexpected care. I need to get you to the caves east of here, Walker whispered, his breath warm against her face. The EDF won't search there. Radiation from the first wave of attacks makes their scanners useless. Starlight nodded weakly, her translator struggling to keep up with his rushed words. The irony wasn't lost on her, seeking shelter in a place poisoned by her own people's weapons. As Walker carried her through the battlefield, she caught glimpses of the destruction around them. Smoking craters, twisted metal, bodies of both species lying side by side in death. Why? She managed to ask, her voice barely audible over Walker's labored breathing as he navigated the treacherous terrain. Why risk for enemy? Walker didn't answer immediately. He paused behind the hull of a downed fighter craft, checking for patrols before continuing his cautious journey toward the eastern hills. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of too many battles. 3 years ago, I was stationed on Colony 9 when your people attacked. His eyes remained fixed on the path ahead, but Starlight could feel the tension in his muscles. I watched a soldier from your side pull a child, one of your children, from the rubble of a collapsed building. She carried that child to safety before continuing her attack. He adjusted his grip on Starlight, wincing slightly. She realized he was injured too, a dark stain spreading slowly across his side where his armor had been damaged. That moment, it changed something for me. Made me realize this war isn't as simple as they want us to believe. A distant explosion lit up the sky, followed by the distinctive whine of dropships. Walker cursed under his breath and ducked into a shallow ravine, pressing them both against the dirt wall. Walker to base, he whispered into his comm unit, which he'd switched back on. Sector 4 clear. Moving to Sector 5. A lie, but one that might buy them time. Copy that, Lieutenant, came the crackling response. Be advised, Command wants all units back at base by 600. Orders coming down. They're planning to glass this entire region. Starlight felt Walker's body stiffen against hers. Glass it, she knew what that meant. Orbital bombardment. Nothing would survive. Understood, Walker replied, his voice carefully controlled. ETA 40 minutes. He switched off the comm and looked down at Starlight, his expression grim. We have less than 3 hours to get clear of this zone. As they continued their dangerous journey, Starlight's mind drifted to how she'd ended up here. She hadn't volunteered for the invasion force. No one in her position did. The ruling caste had implemented the conscription program 5 cycles ago when their resources began to dwindle. Those from the lower castes were given implants, weapons training, and sent to die on foreign worlds. Her unit commander had noticed her hesitation during their last assault, the one that had left her wounded and abandoned. She hadn't been able to fire on the human settlement they'd been ordered to neutralize. Civilians, elders, young ones, just trying to survive like her own people back home. Defective unit, her commander had spat before leaving her behind. We're almost there. Walker's voice pulled her back to the present. They had reached the foothills, and Starlight could see dark openings in the rock face ahead. The caves he'd mentioned. Walker set her down carefully inside the entrance of the largest cave, then swept the area with a small handheld device. Radiation levels are elevated but not immediately dangerous. We should be safe from detection here. He pulled a small pack from his belt and began properly treating her wounds. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning the worst of the gashes on her leg and applying some kind of sealant that immediately numbed the pain. "You have family?" Starlight asked suddenly, watching his face in the dim light of the emergency lamp he'd set up. Walker's hands stilled for a moment before continuing their work. Had. A wife. Son. They were on Proxima Station when it was hit. Starlight felt something cold settle in her stomach. Proxima Station. Her people had celebrated that victory. Thousands of humans eliminated. Strategic objective achieved. She'd seen the footage during their propaganda briefings. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words feeling wholly inadequate. Walker met her eyes, something unreadable in his expression. "It wasn't your bomb," he said simply. They sat in silence for a while after that, the only sounds their breathing and the distant rumble of the continuing battle. Finally, Walker pulled out a small device and began tapping on it. "What is that?" Starlight asked, curious despite her exhaustion. "Communication terminal. Encrypted." He glanced up at her. "There are others. Humans. And your kind. People who think this war is a mistake. A network trying to find another way." Starlight's heart quickened. "Others like me. Defec." She stopped herself. "Deserters." Walker nodded. "And civilians from both sides. Scientists. Even some military, like me." He continued working on the device. "I'm trying to arrange transport off-planet. Getting you medical attention is priority 1. The idea seemed impossible. Your people would execute you for this. "Probably," Walker agreed with a grim smile. "And yours would do the same to you. Seems we're both traitors now." A soft beep from the device drew his attention. His expression changed as he read the message, a mixture of relief and tension. "We have a pickup. Midnight." But his voice trailed off as he looked outside the cave entrance. In the distance, the night sky was illuminated by the arrival of more ships, massive vessels breaking through the atmosphere. "Reinforcements?" Starlight asked, already knowing the answer. Walker shook his head slowly. "No, those are planet killers." His eyes met hers, fear and determination battling for dominance. "They're moving up the timeline." The ground beneath them trembled, and dust filtered down from the cave ceiling. Whatever time they thought they had was running out fast. Very fast. "Can you walk at all?" Walker asked, already gathering what few supplies he had. Starlight tested her injured leg, wincing at the pain, but finding it could bear at least some weight. "If I must." Walker nodded and helped her to her feet. "Then we move now. Transport's coming to the old mining facility 10 kilometers north." He checked his weapon and handed Starlight a small blade, just in case. As they prepared to leave their temporary shelter, a sound stopped them both cold. Voices, human voices, approaching the cave entrance. Walker immediately doused the lamp and pulled Starlight deeper into the darkness of the cave. "Definitely saw movement heading this way," one voice said. "Probably just wildlife. Another replied, "Nothing survives in these radiation zones for long. Orders are to check everything." Lieutenant Walker missed his last check-in. Walker's grip on Starlight's arm tightened. They were looking for him. The reality of his betrayal was catching up faster than either of them had anticipated. As footsteps grew closer to their hiding place, Walker drew his sidearm and looked at Starlight with an expression that asked a silent question. How far were they willing to go to survive? The footsteps grew louder, echoing against the cave walls. Walker pulled Starlight deeper into the darkness, each step a battle against time and pain. Her leg throbbed with every movement, but she bit her lip to keep silent. Survival depended on it. "There's a network of tunnels back here," Walker whispered, his voice barely audible. "Old mining operations. If we can reach them." A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the cave floor just meters from where they pressed against the wall. Starlight held her breath, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs. The beam moved again, closer this time. "Lieutenant Walker," a voice called out. "If you're in here, respond." Haman's worried. Walker's grip on his weapon tightened, his knuckles white in the darkness. Starlight could feel the conflict radiating from him. These were his people, perhaps even friends. The thought of him firing on his own kind because of her made something twist inside her chest. Before Walker could decide, the ground shook violently, nearly throwing them both off their feet. Dust and small rocks showered down from above. The bombardment had begun. "Forget the search." Another voice shouted from the cave entrance, "We need to get back to the transport now." The beams of light retreated, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Walker waited 3 agonizing minutes before switching on his small lamp again. "They're evacuating," he said, his face grim in the pale light. "Which means we have less time than I thought." The cave shook again, more violently this time. A crack appeared in the ceiling above them, spreading like a lightning bolt through stone. "Move." Walker grabbed Starlight, half carrying her as they plunged deeper into the cave system. Behind them, part of the ceiling collapsed with a deafening crash, sending a cloud of dust billowing after them. The path back was sealed. They pushed forward through narrowing tunnels, the small lamp throwing wild shadows against the rock walls. Each tremor threatened to bury them alive, yet the alternative, being caught in the open during the bombardment, was certain death. The mining facility. Starlight gasped through pain. "How far now?" "If these tunnels follow the old maps in my database, we should be directly beneath it," Walker replied, his breathing labored. "But finding a way up." The tunnel ahead split into 3 branches. Walker hesitated, checking his device against the rock wall. "Signal's weak down here. Can't get a clear reading." Another violent shake sent them stumbling. This wasn't just bombardment anymore. The planet itself was beginning to break apart under the assault. "Listen." Starlight suddenly tilted her head. Through the rumbling, another sound reached them. Mechanical, rhythmic, air circulation. Walker nodded and pointed to the leftmost tunnel. "That way." Air systems mean infrastructure. Infrastructure means a way up. They moved as quickly as Starlight's injury allowed, following the sound through the winding passage. The tremors grew stronger, more frequent. Time was running out. The tunnel gradually widened, opening into what had once been a large underground storage area. Ancient machinery loomed in the shadows, covered in decades of dust. And there, on the far wall, an elevator shaft. "That's our way up," Walker said, relief evident in his voice. As they crossed the chamber, Starlight's translator picked up a transmission, faint but clear enough to understand. It wasn't in human language. "Walker," she grabbed his arm, her voice urgent. "My people. They're here." Before he could respond, the elevator doors at the end of the chamber groaned open. Light spilled into the darkened space, silhouetting 3 figures, the unmistakable tall, slender forms of her species' elite warriors. Walker reacted instantly, pulling Starlight behind a massive piece of mining equipment. They crouched in silence, watching as the warriors swept the room with scanning devices. Life signs detected. one of them said in their native tongue, which Starlight understood but Walker couldn't. Two signatures. One of us, one human. The deserter and her human accomplice. Another replied, adjusting something on his weapon. Command wants the human alive for interrogation. The deserter is expendable. Cold fear washed over Starlight. Not just for herself, but for Walker. Her people's interrogation methods were designed to break even the strongest minds. Death would be preferable. Walker looked at her questioningly, sensing her terror. What are they saying? He whispered. Starlight swallowed hard. They know who we are. She hesitated, then met his eyes. They want to capture you. For interrogation. Understanding darkened his features. They both knew what that meant. How many ways out of this chamber? He asked, scanning their surroundings. Just the elevator and the way we came in. Starlight replied, her mind racing. But there's something else. Walker, these aren't just any warriors. They're Shadowbringers, elite hunters. They can sense body heat, even track specific genetic signatures. We can't hide from them for long. Another tremor shook the chamber, stronger than before. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and a support beam groaned ominously. Time grows short, one of the warriors called out. Reveal yourselves, and the human will be treated with minimal cruelty. Walker checked his weapon, then reached into his pack and pulled out something Starlight didn't recognize, a small metallic sphere. Last resort, he explained, seeing her confusion. Electromagnetic pulse, strong enough to knock out their weapons and scanners, maybe even the elevator systems. But then how do we get out? Walker's eyes met hers, and she saw something in them she hadn't before, not just determination, but trust. There's something I haven't told you, he said quietly, about that network I mentioned. They're not just waiting for us at the pickup point. He tapped his arm where a small device was implanted beneath his skin. They've been tracking us, waiting for the right moment. Starlight stared at him, realization dawning. A trap. You're using me as bait. Not bait. Walker shook his head firmly. A catalyst. Your defection is more important than you know. There are others in your military, high-ranking officials who want this war to end. They'd been waiting for the right symbol to rally around. The warriors were moving methodically through the chamber now, closing in on their position. Above them, the ceiling cracked, small pieces of concrete breaking free. The entire structure was becoming unstable. We need to move now, Walker said, his hand hovering over the pulse device. When I activate this, run for the elevator. No matter what happens, get in and hit the top-level button. Someone will be waiting. And you? Starlight asked, already knowing his answer. Walker gave her a small, sad smile. I'll be right behind you. They both knew it was a lie. Before she could argue, the warrior's scanner beeped loudly. They'd been located. Now, Walker shouted, activating the pulse device and throwing it toward the approaching warriors. A blinding flash filled the chamber, followed by the distinctive sound of weapons and technology failing. The warriors staggered, momentarily disoriented. Walker pushed Starlight toward the elevator, covering her retreat with suppressing fire from his sidearm. She stumbled forward, her injured leg threatening to buckle with each step. Behind her, she heard the warriors recovering, switching to traditional weapons, deadly even without their technology. The elevator loomed ahead, its doors still open, promising escape. Starlight reached it and turned back. Walker was surrounded, fighting with everything he had, but it wasn't enough. One of the warriors had him in their sights, weapon raised for a killing blow. In that moment, Starlight made her choice. Starlight's body moved before her mind could catch up. The small blade Walker had given her earlier was suddenly in her hand as she launched herself back toward the fight, ignoring the screaming pain in her injured leg. Years of combat training took over, training she had never fully embraced until this moment, when it wasn't about killing but about saving. Walker, she screamed, her voice carrying over the rumbling of the collapsing facility. The distraction worked. The warrior about to strike Walker turned, surprise evident even through his battle mask. It was enough. Walker rolled sideways, firing 3 rapid shots that caught one warrior in the chest. But there were still 2 left, and they were already adjusting to the unexpected attack. The nearest warrior swung towards Starlight, his blade arcing through the air where she had been a split second before. She ducked under his reach, her smaller size an advantage in the confined space, and slashed at the exposed connection point in his armor where flexibility was prioritized over protection. A lucky strike. Dark fluid sprayed as she severed an arterial line. The chamber shook violently, chunks of ceiling crashing down around them. A support beam collapsed, narrowly missing Walker as he grappled with the third warrior. Dust filled the air, making it difficult to see, to breathe. The whole place is coming down, Walker shouted, breaking free from his opponent's grip. Starlight, go. Now. But retreat wasn't an option anymore. The path to the elevator was blocked by fallen debris, and the warrior Starlight had wounded was still dangerous, backing her against a wall of ancient mining equipment. His eyes burned with hatred and something else. Recognition. I know you, he said in their native tongue, his voice a hiss through his pain. Unit 7, Infiltration Division. You were to be our key to the human defense network. He spat a dark glob onto the floor. Pathetic. The genetic modification program wasted resources on you. Genetic modification. The words hit Starlight like a physical blow. Memories flashed through her mind. Fragments she had never been able to piece together. The labs. The pain. The voices discussing her potential while she lay strapped to examination tables. What did they do to me? She demanded, circling warily, blade held defensively. The warrior laughed, a harsh sound even as he clutched his wounded side. You really don't know. Why do you think you can understand their language so easily? Why you look more like them than the rest of us? You were designed to infiltrate, to gain their trust. A long-term weapon. Another violent tremor shook the chamber. A massive crack spread across the ceiling, water beginning to seep through. Somewhere above, support structures were failing catastrophically. Starlight. Walker's voice cut through her shock. He had dispatched the third warrior and was frantically trying to clear a path to the elevator. Whatever he's saying, don't listen. We need to move. The wounded warrior saw her distraction and lunged, his blade slicing toward her throat. Starlight reacted on instinct, deflecting the blow and countering with a strike that caught him under his chin where his armor ended. He staggered back, gurgling, then collapsed. Starlight stood frozen, staring at her bloody blade. Her first kill. Not in service to her people's war, but in defense of a human who had shown her more kindness than her own kind ever had. I've cleared enough space, Walker called, extending his hand toward her. But we have maybe 2 minutes before this whole level floods or collapses. Starlight ran to him, navigating around fallen debris. Together, they squeezed through the narrow opening Walker had created, reaching the elevator just as another support beam gave way behind them. Walker slammed his palm against the control panel, and the doors slid shut with a groan of protesting metal. The elevator lurched upward, the machinery struggling against the structural damage. You came back, Walker said, his breathing ragged, blood flowing from a gash on his forehead. You should have run. So should you, Starlight replied, the warrior's revelations still spinning in her mind. Walker, they said I was engineered, created to infiltrate your people. Walker's expression darkened. Does that change who you chose to be in that moment back there? He gestured to where they had fought. Does that change who you're choosing to be right now? Before she could answer, the elevator shuddered violently, metal screeching against metal as the shaft began to warp. They were only halfway to the surface. We're not going to make it, Walker muttered, examining the elevator ceiling. There should be an emergency hatch. The lights flickered, then died completely, plunging them into darkness. The elevator ground to a halt with a final, ominous groan. No, 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 Walker's voice came from the darkness. followed by the sound of him pounding on the control panel. Nothing happened. Starlight felt for the walls in the blackness, trying to orient herself. The hatch you mentioned. Where? Center of the ceiling. Should be a release mechanism. She reached up, fingers searching blindly until they found a metal handle. She pulled, and a square section of the ceiling swung downward. Cold, damp air rushed in. Walker activated a small light on his wrist device, illuminating their grim situation. The elevator had stopped halfway between floors, with just enough space at the top to squeeze through if they could climb up. "I'll boost you," Walker said, crouching down and interlacing his fingers to create a step. "And then what? How will you get up?" A twisted smile crossed his face. "I've gotten out of worse spots than this." Another lie, and they both knew it. The shaft was already filling with water and debris from above. The planet's bombardment was reaching its final, most devastating phase. Time had run out. The decision crystallized in Starlight's mind with sudden clarity. "Together," she said firmly, "or not at all." Walker stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. New plan." He pulled a small device from his pack, similar to the pulse emitter he'd used earlier, but different. Emergency beacon. Strongest signal the Resistance has. If they're monitoring for it. Starlight understood. It will lead them directly to us. Or to our bodies, Walker added grimly, activating the device. It emitted a soft, pulsing glow. The elevator groaned again, metal bending as pressure increased from above and below. Water was now ankle-deep and rising fast. "If they're coming, they better hurry," Starlight said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Walker reached out and took her hand, a strangely intimate gesture amidst the chaos. "Why did you come back for me?" "The truth." Starlight looked at their joined hands, 5 fingers interlaced with 3, different in every way and yet fitting together. "Because you saw me as a person when everyone else, both our kinds, saw me as a weapon or a tool." The water reached their knees. The elevator creaked ominously. "If we survive this," Walker said, his voice barely audible over the rushing water and distant explosions, "there's something you should know about that Resistance network." A massive tremor shook the entire shaft. Metal screamed as bolts tore free. The elevator lurched downward several feet before catching again. Water now reached their waists and was rising rapidly. Above them, through the open hatch, a new sound cut through the chaos, the distinctive whine of engines. Powerful lights suddenly blazed down from above, illuminating the flooding shaft. "Is that?" Starlight began. "Could be rescue," Walker said tensely. "Or could be either of our militaries making sure no one survives." The light intensified, focusing directly on the elevator hatch. A voice boomed down, distorted by the shaft acoustics and the sounds of destruction all around. "Lieutenant Walker, respond if you can hear us." Walker and Starlight exchanged glances, friend or foe. The final moment of decision had arrived. Water swirled around their chests now, frigid and rising fast. Walker looked up at the light, his jaw clenched in determination. "Only one way to find out," he said, raising his voice to be heard over the cacophony of destruction. "This is Lieutenant Walker. I have a civilian with me. We need immediate extraction." There was a moment of silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. Starlight's breathing came in short gasps, her body trembling from cold and fear. The water continued to rise, now reaching their shoulders. Then a rope ladder unfurled through the hatch, slapping against the elevator ceiling. "Grab hold," the voice commanded. "We have 90 seconds before this whole sector goes critical." Walker pushed Starlight toward the ladder. "You first." She grasped the rungs with shaking hands, pulling herself up despite her injured leg screaming in protest. The water was at Walker's chin now, forcing him to tilt his head back. As Starlight emerged through the hatch, strong hands grabbed her arms, hauling her onto what appeared to be the floor of a small transport craft. She rolled to the side, gasping for breath, then immediately turned back to the opening. "Walker, she screamed, reaching down through the hatch. His hand appeared, grasping for the ladder as the water churned violently below. Their fingers brushed, missed, then connected. Starlight pulled with all her remaining strength, feeling something tear in her shoulder as she did. A massive tremor shook the entire structure. Metal groaned. The shaft began to collapse. "Pull him up now," Starlight cried to whoever was helping her. Two figures in unmarked combat gear rushed forward, grabbing Walker's arms as his head and shoulders emerged from the hatch. Together, they dragged him into the craft just as the elevator below gave way entirely, plummeting into the darkness with a distant crash. The hatch slammed shut automatically. A voice from the front of the craft shouted, "We're clear. Go, go, go." The transport lurched upward with bone-jarring speed, throwing them all against the floor. Through a small viewport, Starlight caught glimpses of the mining facility breaking apart beneath them, entire sections collapsing into a growing sinkhole as the bombardment continued. Walker crawled toward her, his face pale from exertion and blood loss. "You okay?" he managed to ask. Before she could answer, one of their rescuers stepped between them. The figure removed their helmet, revealing features that made Starlight's breath catch. A hybrid, like her, but older, with more pronounced alien characteristics blended with human form. His eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangular pattern, studied her with obvious recognition. "We were told there might be one of us with you, Lieutenant," the hybrid said, his voice carrying the slight harmonic undertone of Starlight's species. "But we weren't certain until we picked up her genetic signature." Starlight looked from the hybrid to Walker, confusion and betrayal warring in her mind. "You knew about what I am." Walker struggled to sit up, wincing. "Not everything. But yes, enough. The Resistance has been monitoring the genetic program for years. We knew they were creating infiltrators, but we didn't know they'd abandoned one on the battlefield." The hybrid extended a 3-fingered hand to Starlight. "My name is Vex. First-generation hybrid, escaped 8 cycles ago. There are more of us, dozens now, all part of what humans call the Unity Coalition. The Resistance you mentioned," Starlight said to Walker, pieces falling into place. Walker nodded. "Both sides have groups that want this war to end. Your defection, the fact that one of their newest models chose to save an enemy rather than complete their mission, that's powerful symbolism we can use." The transport shuddered violently as it pushed through the upper atmosphere, the hull heating from the friction and external bombardment. Warning lights flashed across control panels. "We've been spotted," the pilot called back, her voice tense. 2 pursuit crafts, military grade, EDF by the signature. "Human military?" Starlight asked, alarmed. Vex's expression darkened. "Both sides want us dead. Hybrids represent the possibility of cooperation, the idea that our species can coexist. Neither government can allow that narrative to spread." Through the viewport, Starlight could see the curve of the planet falling away beneath them, beautiful despite the visible wounds of war scarring its surface. Flashes of weapons fire streaked past the transport. "Warning shots. Incoming transmission," the pilot announced. "They're ordering us to return to surface for immediate boarding and inspection." Walker pushed himself to his feet, steadying himself against the wall. "Let me talk to them. Some of them might still listen to me." The hybrid called Vex shook his head. "Your credentials have been revoked, Lieutenant. The moment you helped her, you became an enemy of the state." He turned to the pilot. "Status of the jump drive. Charging. 40 seconds to minimum capacity." Starlight felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was larger than just her survival now. Every choice had brought her here. Her hesitation to fire on civilians, Walker's decision to help her, their mutual choice to trust each other despite everything they'd been taught. "They're locking weapons," the pilot called, urgency in her voice. 30 seconds to jump capability." Through the viewport, Starlight could see the pursuit crafts closing distance, their weapon systems glowing as they prepared to fire. There would be no warning shots this time. "We need to buy time," Walker said, looking around the small craft frantically. "Is there anything we can use as countermeasures?" Vex moved to a storage compartment and pulled out what appeared to be a small drone. "Emergency decoy. It might confuse their targeting systems for a few moments." "Do it," Walker urged. As Vex prepared the decoy, the transport rocked violently. A glancing hit. Warning lights flashed more urgently throughout the cabin. "Hull breach in the cargo section," the pilot shouted. "Sealing bulkhead doors." A mechanical voice began counting down. "Jump capability in 15 seconds. Another blast hit them, this one causing the lights to flicker and die momentarily before emergency systems kicked in. Starlight was thrown against the wall, pain exploding through her already injured body. 10 seconds to jump capability. Walker crawled to her side, blood streaming from a fresh cut above his eye. "Stay with me," he urged, taking her hand. 7 seconds. The pursuing crafts closed in, visible now through the viewport, weapons fully charged and locked on their position. 5 seconds. Vex launched the decoy, a small flash as it deployed from the craft. 3. The pursuing ships fired, energy beams cutting through the void toward them. 2. Walker's grip on Starlight's hand tightened. Their eyes met, a lifetime of understanding passing between them in that moment. 1. The universe seemed to hold its breath. Jump. Reality twisted and folded. The universe compressed into a single point of light, then exploded outward again. Starlight felt her consciousness scatter and reform, her body simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Then, with a violent lurch, everything snapped back into place. The transport craft shuddered as it emerged from the jump, systems struggling to stabilize. Through the viewport, the pursuing military vessels were gone, replaced by the vast emptiness of unfamiliar space. A distant star burned orange-red, its light casting long shadows across the transport's interior. "Jump successful," the pilot announced, her voice raw with relief. "All critical systems functioning." Starlight slowly unclenched her hand from Walker's, noticing the deep impressions her fingers had left in his palm. He didn't seem to mind, offering her a weary smile instead. "Where are we?" she asked, looking around at the others. Vex moved to a control panel, checking the coordinates. "Outer rim of the Cygnus sector. Uninhabited system, no registered patrols from either side. We're safe for now." Walker slumped against the wall, exhaustion finally claiming him. A medic, another hybrid, this one with more human features, moved to tend his wounds, applying regenerative patches to the worst of them. "He needs proper medical attention," the medic said to no one in particular. "We should head to the sanctuary station." Sanctuary station. The word sparked recognition in Starlight's mind. Whispers she'd heard among the lower castes. Rumors of a place where deserters could find refuge. She'd always dismissed it as fantasy. "It's real then?" she asked Vex. "A place where both our kinds live together?" Vex nodded, his 3 eyes blinking in sequence, a gesture of affirmation from their species. For 5 cycles now. Started as a decommissioned research outpost in disputed territory. Now home to nearly 3,000 humans, your people, and hybrids like us. The medic moved to examine Starlight next, gentle hands assessing her injured leg and shoulder. "You'll recover," he assured her, "though this leg will need surgical intervention." Starlight barely registered his words, her mind still processing everything that had happened. Just days ago, she'd been abandoned on a battlefield, certain of her death. Now she sat among those she'd been taught to kill, headed for a sanctuary she'd thought mythical. "Why me?" she finally asked, looking toward Walker. "Out of all the wounded on that battlefield, why did you choose to help me?" Walker's eyes opened, tired but clear. "Truth, it wasn't just compassion. When I found you, my scanner picked up anomalies in your genetic structure, patterns the resistance had told us to watch for." He shifted, wincing at the movement. "But that's not why I stayed with you when things got complicated. That was something else." The Unity Coalition has been monitoring the hybrid program for years, Vex explained, taking a seat across from them. The military created you to infiltrate human societies, but they made a fundamental error. What error? Starlight asked. They gave you human empathy. The pilot called back from the cockpit. The ability to understand and share the feelings of others. It's what makes humans both wonderful and terrible, their capacity to care beyond their own self-interest. Vex nodded. Every hybrid they've created has eventually questioned orders, refused to harm innocents, or actively worked against the war effort. You're the 17th to defect in the past cycle alone. Starlight thought about the moment she'd refused to fire on the human settlement, the instant she knew she couldn't follow orders anymore. It hadn't felt like betrayal then. It had felt like clarity. There's something else you should know, Walker said, his voice stronger now as the medical patches took effect. The resistance network, it's larger than either government acknowledges. Military officers, scientists, civilians on both sides. People tired of watching their worlds burn for resources that could be shared. The transport hummed steadily around them, distance growing between them and the war-torn planet they'd escaped. Through the viewport, stars streaked by, constant, unchanging despite the conflicts that raged beneath them. We've received confirmation from Sanctuary Station, the pilot announced. ETA 14 hours. Vex stood and moved toward the small galley area of the transport. You both need rest and nourishment. The jump takes a physical toll, especially your first time. As he prepared food rations, Starlight turned to Walker. What happens now? To us? To the war? Walker's expression grew contemplative. The war won't end tomorrow, or the next day. But each person who chooses peace over conflict, cooperation over domination, they tilt the balance. He took the simple meal Vex offered with a nod of thanks. As for us, that depends on what you want. I don't know what I want, Starlight admitted. I've never been allowed to want anything before. A small smile touched Walker's lips. That's the beauty of freedom. You get to figure it out. Hours passed. Starlight drifted in and out of sleep, her mind processing the events of the past days. In her dreams, she saw the battlefield again, felt the moment of abandonment. But now, the pain of that memory was tempered by something else. Understanding of why she'd been left behind. She hadn't been defective. She'd been evolving beyond her programming. She woke to Vex gently shaking her shoulder. We're approaching Sanctuary Station. You'll want to see this. Moving carefully to avoid aggravating her injuries, Starlight made her way to the viewport. What she saw took her breath away. The sanctuary wasn't just a station. It was a small city in space. Multiple connected structures formed a rough circle around a central hub, lights glimmering from countless windows. Ships of various designs, both human and from her people, moved in coordinated patterns around the station. It wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Beautiful, isn't it? Walker had joined her at the viewport, his face reflecting the lights of the sanctuary. How has neither side destroyed this? Starlight asked, awestruck by the scale of it. Mutually assured destruction, Vex explained. The station houses high-ranking defectors from both militaries, scientists with knowledge that could devastate either side. Attack the sanctuary, and those secrets get broadcast across every communication channel in known space. The transport glided toward a docking bay, automated systems guiding them in. Through the viewport, Starlight could see figures waiting, humans, and her people standing side by side, without weapons, without fear. Welcome to your new home, the pilot said as the transport settled into its berth, with a gentle shudder. The outer door opened, and Starlight felt her first breath of station air, recycled but clean, carrying the sense of growing things and cooked food. Walker stood beside her, still weak but insistent on walking under his own power. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand, a gesture that had come to mean so much more than simple assistance. Starlight took it, their different fingers interlacing naturally now. "I think I am." They stepped from the transport together, into the light of the sanctuary. A small crowd had gathered, not a military reception, but simply people curious about new arrivals. Among them, Starlight noticed several young hybrids, children who had never known anything but this place of peace. An older human woman stepped forward, her silver hair pulled back in a practical style. "Lieutenant Walker," she greeted him. "When we received your emergency signal, we feared the worst." "Commander Reyes," Walker acknowledged with respect. "It was close, without your extraction team." The woman turned her attention to Starlight, eyes sharp but not unkind. "And you must be our newest resident. What shall we call you?" Starlight hesitated. Her designation had been a military code, not a name. "Starlight," she finally said. "I think I'd like to be called Starlight." Commander Reyes nodded, as if approving the choice. "Welcome to Sanctuary, Starlight. Rest, heal. When you're ready, we'll talk about where you fit in here." She smiled slightly. Everyone contributes in their own way. As they moved deeper into the station, Starlight felt something unfamiliar expanding in her chest. Hope, perhaps. Not just for herself, but for all of them. The war would continue to rage across the stars, but here, in this improbable sanctuary, something new was growing. And she, an abandoned weapon who had chosen compassion over programming, would be part of it. Walker squeezed her hand gently as they walked. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Starlight looked around at the impossible community they'd found. The living proof that another way was possible. "I'm thinking that sometimes being abandoned is really being set free." Above them, through a vast observation window, countless stars shimmered in the darkness, distant worlds where battles still rage. But for now, in this moment, they had found their piece of peace among the chaos. And it was enough.